if you're Taiwanese and you like the idea of being reabsorbed into Beijing and being part of one China, then I don't know, I guess that's probably fine. Then you probably should choose China. That makes sense. I think Taiwan's a thriving, proud, democratic country, and the more that the Taichung are investing into essentially the capabilities that would allow them to take over the island, great history is going to be. And that's sort of the same case for Apple, right? So it's more visceral with Taiwan, but I end a chapter by saying, as China GDP eventually overtakes America's, more people are going to ask, like, how do they do it? And I think more people are going to be like, we taught them how to do it.
Hi, 大家好。
大家好，
好久没有看到我们两个在这样的一个形式出现哦。我们今天是睽违我们两个难得再一次要专访，这一次我们要专访谁
？Patrick McGee， 这个《苹果在中国》的作者。
没错，那时候出版社来问说有没有想要访问的时候，我要啊，当然要啊，然后我要拉着李可欣一起访。我觉得你一定会对这本书有兴趣，
我觉得非常非常好看。读这本书让我觉得有点像那个晶片战争。
啊，有点像，
它的章节切分的也很多，然后也是在讲这个科技的进程，然后讲的非常多当时的一些小故事跟细节，但读起来不会累，是很好读的。
那为什么我会说我一定要接这个专访？是因为其实我不知道你看过这本书了没有？那我觉得在这本书里面，我们比较少看到关于他自己的存在。
他过去也有在《华尔街日报》担任记者，那时候是写债券，他主要比较多的时间都是在写科技相关的这个记者。那我觉得因为他是记者的关系，不会是那种参与在其中，他比较多都是用旁观者、分析者的这个角度去写这些故事，所以真的是非常的客观，
跟用大量资料来佐证。
没错，
那佐证什么事情呢？很简单，这本书就是在讲苹果是如何一步一步的过度依赖中国，以至于它现在离不开。但是我们都知道，像写这样子，它有关于到政治立场的书，或者是如何关于到怎么站在西方世界去看在中国的制造业这一块，它一定包含到个人的经历去解读这些事情。所以今天在这场访问里面呢，其实我们会花更多的时间在了解 Patrick McGee 这个人，他过去对于中国的认识是什么。然后他在写这本书的过程之中，他有没有发现一些以前他没有发现过的中国的面向，或者是苹果的面向？然后当然在这个专访里面，其实他都问了很多关于台湾的事情。
对，因为在这本书里面，台商的角色也非常非常的重要。其中一个大家可以想象的就是郭台铭嘛，
富士康。
对，那所以他其实也有讨论到很多，他怎么去看台湾人，为什么台湾可以造就苹果在中国如此的成功？那这个东西它能不能复制在其他地方？
然后我问了一个蛮重要的问题，在书里面我们看到他所谓的苹果在中国其实是略为负面的一个结果。就是让苹果已经无法抽身了。那我也问 Patrick， 如果今天还是有台湾人认为我们应该要更加的靠近中国市场，中国市场是我们唯一的出路的时候，他会给台湾人什么样的讯息？好，所以这场专访其实时间蛮长的。然后要提醒一件事情 ，Patrick 的语速很快。所以如果你觉得你听不太清楚，虽然我们都会上中文字幕，但你可以把整个影片的速度调慢一点点，或许可以更能够理解他在很多的大量资讯里面他想要给我们什么样的 insight。那最后如果你还没有看这本书的话，其实我个人认为它不太影响你去观赏这个专访，
但还是非常推荐大家买来看。我觉得也非常好看，而且是那种你睡前读也不会睡不着的。它虽然讲的东西很硬，但它的写法不会让你觉得就是太沉重。
没错，如果你还没有买的话，那没关系，就是我觉得你看完这场专访，你可以把这场专访作为一种导引。听完专访之后，回头再看这本书，你应该可以在里面看到更多Patrick 想给你的讯息。好，然后不要忘记，我们其实这次也有偷偷的录一些会员专属内容。那我们会把内容放在了 Apple Podcast 上面的敏迪偷选读。所以如果你想要听更多关于 Patrick 自己在写这本书里面他感受到什么样困难的点，欢迎去听敏迪偷选读。好，就这样咯，专访开始咯。
How many times have you been to Taiwan?
Yeah,
Never. This is my first time. Yeah.
No way.
You're based in Hong Kong and you've never been to
I
Taiwan?
no, sorry, I feel bad about that.
You should.
When I was in Hong Kong, I loved it. It was like the best 3 years of my life. It's where I met my wife. And I thought we were going to be there for like 10, 15 years or something. And even when I left, I figured we'd be coming back, right? Like I kept my pension funds there. When I all of a sudden was being moved to Germany, and it was like 2 or 3 weeks after that, that we were offered the job. Had I known we had less time in Hong Kong than I thought, then of course I would have spent more time going to Taiwan, to Japan, probably to mainland, maybe Southeast Asia, etc. But I was in no rush to sort of be checking out everything because I thought I had lots of time.
Yeah.
I'm surprised this is your first time in Taiwan.
Yeah, I wish I had gone. I don't know. I didn't have any particular reason to go.
How come you write a book and a pretty huge part of the book is all about Taiwan, but you never been to Taiwan?
Yeah, you can ask that on the camera.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I have a decent answer, I think. I don't know if this is a good answer, but I think about historians who write about the French Revolution or something, they're not witnessing it. I think it would help in certain respects, but as you'll notice, no part of the book is like me doing this. I'm not in the book, right? In fact, in retrospect, this wasn't part of the plan, but I think it's helped the whole like podcast thing, because if you read the book and you like the book, you have lots of questions for me because I don't say anything about myself.
Duty to being a journalist so that you have to stay out of the book.
I don't know if it's duty, but I don't like books that, I think the topic is so big, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not a character in the story. And so it would be just kind of silly to insert myself into the narrative.
Very
so for
factual
instance,
based.
yeah, so I have a book about supply chain, and I like the author, but I hate how the book begins because he's like, so there I was, like at the Golden Triangle where Burma meets Thailand. And that's when I realized that. And I just thought, dude, like supply chains are important. We don't care about you. Just show me why they're important. So, the first sentence of the book in English, right? It's something like, Xi Jinping wasted no time making it clear to the world's most valuable company that things would be different. And you're just in the narrative immediately, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually a narrative that either no one's heard before, they don't know the 2013 episode, or at best, it's a hazy memory, and I'm giving them more details. So the hope was that if I could just convince you to read the first paragraph or the first page, that you would keep going. And I think so many business books fail that test because the first page is just some like standard introduction to where someone went to university or something. And I don't like business books. So I tried to think... No.
Do you think your book is a business book?
Well, it is. Yeah, of course it is. But I try to think about, why don't I like business books and how can I write mine in a way that avoids that criticism?
Cool.
Yeah, because when I was meeting with Simon & Schuster, the English publisher, they would say, so what business books are you going to model it on? And I was like,
no.
I don't like business books, I was able to say Bad Blood. Do you know Bad Blood by John Carey?
Yeah. But I found it's a little bit similar to the Chips War.
Yes. So lots of people say that, and it's not a coincidence. Chris Miller is the person who told me you should write a book about this.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah. We didn't know each other at the time, but he had read an article of mine. Obviously about the topic. I told him I don't know how to write a book pitch. So he said, do you want to see the book pitch for Chip War? Wow. So it was called The Switch at the time, which is funny because it's such a bad title. I modeled my pitch off of his template.
Wow. So he's the one who gave you the idea to write this book?
Oh, the structure.
I mean, I thought about the idea. I just didn't know anyone in the book world. So he said, do you want to meet my agent?
Oh.
And I did. That guy's name is Toby. And Toby and I met, the following day or something. And at the end of the hour, I said, so when do you want the book pitch by? And he said, yesterday. So he was just excited from the get-go.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, I call Chris Miller like my mentor.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever meet him until the book was actually published.
Wow.
But his influence, even though it was like so fleeting, it was like, I can't emphasize how important it was.
Before we started, we talked about your experience in Hong Kong, right? I wonder that there's a very last interview that you talk about your Hong Kong experiences. So before we dive into the complex world about geopolitics, what years you stayed in Hong Kong, and how does the experiences you stay in Hong Kong shape your understanding about China?
So 2013 to 2016. So I was there for 3 years. And sort of anyone familiar with Hong Kong will immediately realize that's the time of the umbrella protests. But it was a major time when like high school students sort of led this, but it was really citywide where there were major protests. And depending on your perspective, they're either clamoring for semi-autonomy or actual independence or full-on democracy or something. I wasn't there when years later they really clamped down on that entirely and implemented a national security law that was really quite arbitrary. But, in a short matter of years, Hong Kong went from being my favorite city in the world to a city that I couldn't comfortably visit. I mean, now with the publication of the book, I don't think I can go there the rest of my life. Yeah.
You're afraid that too?
Well, because frankly, it's just another Chinese city at this point. And for the same reasons that I can't really go to China, I can't go to Hong Kong. And I mean, that completely breaks my heart. So, of course, that's going to shape your understanding of how you view China and how you view China-U.S. relations and so forth.
Do you personally affected by the Hong Kong government's policy at the time?
No, because I was living at a time when Hong Kong was truly a semi-autonomous region that had freedom of speech. So when I was writing all sorts of stories for the Financial Times, I was never considering censorship on the part of Beijing or something. And in fact, one time I wrote a story that went viral on mainland Chinese media.
What's the topic?
Well, it was mocking, so nobody but real financial wonks are going to understand this or remember this. So this must have been in early 2016. China had introduced a sort of niche tool to halt trading on the market when things got a little too crazy. If you remember, there was this period where there was a rush of retail investors in China purchasing stocks en masse, and it caused stocks to often go up by 10% in a matter of minutes, like the entire stock market. And so this mechanism, and I don't remember what it was called, was rolled out like the first week, I think, of 2016 on a Monday. And by Thursday, it had been abandoned entirely because it basically caused chaos. It was supposed to be like a cool heads will prevail type thing. And instead, it caused such chaos that they pulled it. So I created an image of a gravestone and wrote a rest in peace to this financial tool. And then wrote almost like a poem, just like mocking the whole idea. And then went viral on Sina Weibo. So that was one point when I thought, oh shit, this probably isn't going to be good for next time I go to China. Like I might get questioned about this at the border or something. But aside from that kind of funny example, I was never worried about it. But you absolutely have to be worried about it now. So the Hong Kong bureau chief that sort of followed my time there was Victor Mallet of the Financial Times. And he hosted, from Beijing's perspective, the wrong sort of person at the Foreign Correspondents Club. And he was, given something like 3 or 5 days to exit the country. I mean, he had kids there at school. He had a wife. They all had to pack up and move to Europe. So if you're familiar with that, rather than just reading it, right, you're experiencing that. You have friends that are having their lives affected. Absolutely, that shapes your understanding of the country. A lot of journalists
experienced that back in 2020 after the COVID.
Yeah, and of course, I still have friends that are in Hong Kong, and some have stayed and some have left. But I hear things from them as well. Maybe I should just say, so that's the experiential part. But then, of course, being a foreign correspondent, you spend a lot of time reading up on the material in the country, right? You want to be sort of adept with it. And so I remember there's a piece in the New Yorker by Evan Osnos called Born Red. And it's sort of a biography, but in an essay form of Xi Jinping. And I mean, it goes through how many people in the party had been, maybe purged isn't quite the right word, but it was about Xi Jinping's corruption drive. Yeah. And I literally thought there must be a typo because it was in the hundreds of thousands, right? Oh. And that's such a large number that you're like, is this supposed to be like 100 people? Like, are we really talking about, like, it was a real sort of awakening. It's still a great piece to read now. I sort of reviewed it when I was doing the book. So if people aren't familiar with Evan Osnos, Born Red, in the New Yorker from more than 10 years ago. It's a fantastic piece.
We're actually at the forum you with DSET yesterday.
Yeah.
We learned a lot from the forum. But during the QA session, you actually mentioned that when you're writing this book and you try to reach out to a high-level CCP official and then your email got hacked. Yeah. You didn't say it's from CCP. You didn't say it's from or from Apple. But can you share a little bit more about that story? I just find it so interesting.
Interesting?
Yeah.
I was thinking about it last night and that I shouldn't have been talking about that publicly. So now that you're asking about it on like a podcast, we're like really disseminating the story. Yeah. Effectively, there's a certain story that I had been told that I wasn't able to source well enough to put into the book.
Okay.
It involved someone that had regular meetings with Xi Jinping. Apple allegedly made friends with this person to get their message to Xi Jinping. I tried to reach out to said person. There was a denial about the sort of claim that I'd made, which is pretty, normal if you're a journalist. But then multiple hacking attempts. So it wasn't actually hacked. Okay. I received security alerts.
Oh, okay.
Quite the coincidence, let's say.
It could be a coincidence. It could be.
Could be.
Stop.
It could be.
Let me back to that's too dangerous topic when we talk about it. One of your interview, I heard that you use a really brilliant metaphor to describe in circle the apple. You use围棋. That's really the brilliant one. So I wonder that, do you play Go?
No, I have tried. So if you haven't seen the movie AlphaGo, which is about Google DeepMind's attempts to sort of master them, amazing documentary. Yeah. I watched it maybe a year ago, and I was so embarrassed that it came out a decade prior, and I had heard of it.
Okay.
Right? So yeah, phenomenal documentary. I use that analogy. I'm stealing it from Henry Kissinger. So it is brilliant, but I'm not the source of the brilliance. Henry Kissinger is, which is not really a source that I want to go around saying is brilliant, but this one, he got it right. I mean, you think of how, let's say Donald Trump went after Huawei, right? That's very much like a chess maneuver, right? A Clausewitz way of going about things, right? You're going after the king, and with one deadly move, you're trying to knock him over kind of thing. And, this is more like Sun Tzu, to be more like encircle the enemy and then just put them in a tight spot. So if you do play Go, and I don't play Go, it's not about sort of one killer move and checkmate. No. It's more about sort of positioning the pieces on the board such that the enemy has to give up. There's nothing they can do, but there is no actual checkmate. It's more like your opponent's realization that they can't make a good move. And to me, that's where Apple is right now.
And actually reminds me of, I really like the analogy, and it reminds me of the so-called the clash of civilization.
Yeah.
So it's like the Apple, they enter China with this chess Western mindset, but actually China we're not playing chess with you, we're playing Go with you. So do you think it's, and your book, you also mentioned about the trap that Apple's over-reliance on China is, and you mentioned this is an inevitable trend for China. So
for Apple, inevitable for the Apple due to the Tim Cook's personality. Then
I think I said I struggle with the inevitability of it because this is still something I think about.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So the way that you described it with the sort of Samuel Huntington Clash of Civilizations thing, there's part of me that's like absolutely right, and then there's part of me that's like history is a little more contingent than that. And when Apple really consolidated their production into China, it was the era of Hu Jintao. And China was sort of this multinational playground.
Yeah.
And I think it was still defensible to think, this country is going to build up a middle class. The middle class is going to demand, better rights, better future. And maybe they're not going to topple the CCP, but they're going to demand enough changes that it'll basically be what Ronald Reagan called China in the 1980s, which was a so-called communist country, right? That it was sort of going in the direction of sort of a liberal direction, right? In a sort of script written by Washington. I think there was evidence to have that belief system. You just look at West Germany, Taiwan, where we are, South Korea, Germany. These are all countries that were actually, in some sense, some of them, direct enemies with America, right?
Yeah.
And then sort of were turned by sort of entering this Pax Americana interdependence of nations where everybody could sort of trade with one another and make the best of it, etc.
Yeah.
So I don't have any scorn for anyone who had that belief in the 90s or 2000s.
It's reasonable.
I think that because yesterday that you mentioned that if Steve Jobs still alive, and then things went differently, it's not Xi to be the president, to be the chairman. Would it be different to go to the direction that you just mentioned?
The rosy scenario actually, so let's say it wasn't Xi Jinping, it was someone that was still much more of like a Deng Xiaoping open up mindset or whatever. It's certainly not the case that you would have, Apple would have diversified operations around the globe. It would be just as consolidated. It just wouldn't be much of a problem, right? Because if you didn't have animosity between the two superpowers and things were sort of going in a nice progressive direction, then it would sort of be like America's dependence on Taiwan for chips.
Yeah.
I mean, take out the geopolitics. I don't see that as a problem. It is only a problem because Beijing thinks of Taiwan as a rogue province that needs to be reabsorbed. And so therefore you're talking about blockades, potential war, etc. But in general, and this is like an important point that seems to get lost on the MAGA crowd in Washington, I don't think we should necessarily care that America is dependent on certain countries for all sorts of products. The question is, are those countries allies?
Yeah.
And if they're not, then you've got a problem.
I think in your book, we described Apple kind of step into the trap in China. So I view this as a negative position. But however, we see that Apple's financials recently is still beautiful. And also the stock price is still going up. So if being stock in China is not about financial problem, so what is the real danger? And do you think when the bubble will burst? And what is the worst case scenario you can imagine?
Those are three very different questions, but they're great issues. Okay. Never has the book been sort of forecasting Apple's demise, right? Apple clearly has gotten a lot out of this relationship.
Yeah.
China has clearly gotten a lot out of this relationship, and one could argue who's sort of gotten more. Maybe the way I would put it is, there's a couple things to say. One is the negative externalities. Company and country have a great relationship, But by Apple not investing in other places and certainly not investing much at home, you've had complete deindustrialization in America over the last 4 or 5 decades. That's hit particular communities quite hard. And in a certain sense, they've taken out their anger with the elites by electing Donald Trump into office twice. So it's had real life impact, I think, for all kinds of people. And then the other thing is that one thing that I've sort of been consumed by since publishing the book 8 or 9 months ago is a better understanding of China's version of capitalism. Companies like Huawei, Xiaomi, they're not worth trillions of dollars the way that American companies are. Yeah. I think Xi Jinping doesn't even want them to be worth trillions of dollars. I think he's more of a hide and bide type personality. And sort of being so ostentatious with the wealth that these companies can be creating is something he doesn't want. This is, in a sense, why he went after Jack Ma and Ant Financial, being worth more than JP Morgan and that kind of thing, 4 or 5 years ago. China capitalism is very much based on capabilities, capacity, strangleholds in the global economy, and so forth. And Western capitalism is very much about profits. So you think of what these two entities got out of the relationship. Apple became worth $4 trillion. China does 35% of the world's manufacturing. It has a virtual monopoly on things like lithium-ion battery supply chains, rare earth metals, including both the mining and the refining, and a whole host of other things. So China's gotten a ton out of this relationship. And you fast forward 10, 15, 20 years from now, I just think that's a scary place to be for anyone who's not in China.
There's a 2 striking image about Tim Cook in your book. Actually, one is in your book, another one, you didn't mention it. The first one is that in 2013, Tim Cook gave the rare public apology to China.
Yeah.
And then in 2025, Tim Cook again presents a golden glass monument to President Trump, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about this contrast?
Well, it's not a contrast, is it? It's so similar.
Consistency, right? One is to the authoritarian leaders.
Is that the Trump one?
No!
Yes. No.
I like your answer. Okay, so another one is for Democratic president. So I think it's a contrast, but the tactic is consistent.
Yes. Apple has learned how to placate authoritarian rulers, and that's quite helpful in the Trump administration.
So you mentioned about reindustrialization of the U.S. And do you think Tim Cook, he is really going to build a production line back in the U.S.? And do you think Trump's tariff policy is going to force Apple to go back to America?
I'll tell you a funny answer, which is that if you type reindustrialization into your iPhone, it autocorrects it to deindustrialization.
Really?
It's as if Siri is having a Freudian slip, giving away the game. I want to see reindustrialization. As I said, friendshoring and ally shoring is just as important, if not more important, than reshoring. So I don't think it all has to be in the United States, but I'm certainly supportive of those efforts. And I've met many entrepreneurs in the last year who are trying to do that. I wish them the best of luck. That's all great. I'm not at all optimistic that the world's most sophisticated supply chain built up over the last 2.5 decades in China is about to, reshore to America. Like it's a fanciful ask. It's just not going to happen. We can talk about the 20 different reasons why it's never going to happen. And it's certainly not going to happen within a presidential term.
Yeah. A lot of Taiwanese giant tech company have to building more plant to the United States. So right now, people said about like this kind of offshoring from Taiwan. Offshoring is kind of hollowing out of Taiwan. So what do you think? Do you think this is a positive or a negative move for Taiwan's future?
嗨，大家，我们讲很久的英语任性课终于推出了。这场英语任性课呢，我们会教大家，平常你在遇到外国人的时候，你要怎么解释台湾跟中国的关系，以及怎么样描述台湾现在在国际上面面临到的处境，跟我们想要怎么跟国际互动。这堂课我们会希望用9大单元的方式来跟大家讲解这个脉络，逐一的去解释。不过我要跟大家先讲一下，就是这堂课的教英文的比例可能没有大家想象中的多一点点。更重要的事情是我们希望大家学习到怎么样可以有一种韧性的思维，学会像外交官一样的说话。
我觉得很多的部分其实是我们台湾就是生长在这里的话，都好像觉得理所当然。然后要解释台湾的这个历史或是脉络，我们的这个处境，我们都觉得可能在我们过去念书，我们都陆陆续续有学到，但是要在一次讲完的时候，你会发现其实有可能不是你英文不好，问题是你中文也不好。
哎，对，我们现在只是让大家其实有那个思维的训练下来，就是我们让你中文跟英文一起变好，一堂课这样很划算。然后这堂课呢，我们现在会在台湾吧推出，在这边台湾吧。那我觉得有台湾吧 非常非常的好。
我们两个有时候就会自己聊，然后就聊到非常非常的生硬，
没错
然后呢就一直在聊我们自己想要讲的话。
没错。
那弯爸呢可以帮助我们跳脱那个思维，然后也补足在历史上面，甚至是在人文、地理等等其他的这个学科，都帮我们更好，让这堂课更全面。
除了线上课程虚拟的东西之外，这次我们会搭配课程推出一个实体的教具，就是英文单字卡哦。这个单字卡呢，我们会用台湾的视角出发，会教你怎么样去扭转我们在国际上的论述。然后这单字卡不容易哟，例如我们会教什么单字
？Linchpin。
哇
，coercion, diplomatic allies
邦交，像这些单字卡呢，就是它有别于过去我们是从国外的角度回来学英文单字，怎么样是找到我们自己的话语权叙事方式来跟大家讲解台湾的处境哦。好，总之呢，就是我们这次准备的英语认识课内容非常的丰富哦，我们会有很多的课程，还有全英文的访问，还有英语单字卡。那大家如果兴趣的话，就点击节目资讯栏连结，然后使用这边的折扣码，你就可以用优惠价格买到喽。大家，我们要一起当一个沉稳、幽默感的国民外交官。
I think it's more about balance. I mean, the thing is, Taiwan know-how is world class.
Yes.
But it's not the size of a country to sort of execute at massive scale, right? That's why Foxconn, Quanta, and Pegatron and all these companies took advantage of what was possible in China, right? The same reason that Apple did. So for the major Taiwanese companies to continue doing that, I think is completely logical. If you lock yourselves into the Taiwanese market, it's just not going to work. It's too small, right? By China standards, Taiwan's the size of a big city.
So it's good for Taiwan, I would say.
Actually,
it's for
it is
Taiwanese companies to expand worldwide.
Yeah, it is complex, right? Because Taiwanese talk about the Silicon Shield being essentially that all the know-how for 90% of the advanced chips are in Taiwan, right? Specifically at TSMC, basically. And so the more that is someplace else, I can understand why the Taiwanese would feel less safe about their future. So as far as I know from TSMC, yes, they're expanding to Arizona and Germany and Japan. They're not ever going to be expanding the most advanced, cutting-edge, bleeding-edge nodes in those countries. They'll always be a step or two behind, and that strikes me as making all kinds of sense.
And I also want to follow up on, previously you mentioned that China, they are more, U.S. company, American companies more into interest, profit. But the Chinese company more into capacity. Sorry, I couldn't name the
Capacity, capabilities, chokeholds.
Yeah, and now U.S. and China in this tech competition. And do you think innovation is also one of the key factors determining who is going to win? And do you think Apple actually equipped China with the ability of innovation?
Yeah, so the last question first. I mean, absolutely they did.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh, I mean, I don't even know why that would be controversial in a certain sense. But
is that to the ability of, cannot be compared with the U.S.?
Yeah.
Can which compare the innovation?
Yes.
Well, so the thing is, China didn't have to be doing the 0 to 1 innovation over the last 25 years in all of the areas where Apple was a force, because Apple was delivering it all on a silver platter on multiple flights coming in daily, right?
Yeah.
So they could just execute where they're best, which was scaling. But now I think the Chinese are at a point where they absolutely can innovate. The next Johnny Ive is Chinese for sure.
The next Johnny Ive is who?
I said is Chinese. I don't know who it is.
It's Chinese.
Yeah.
Really?
Well,
That's your belief in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm unfortunately quite pessimistic about this, right? But if you think of sort of the marriage of China and Apple, right, the sort of meet cute moment in 1999, that was a stage where America, let's say, or Apple had the skill, but not the scale. And China had the scale, but not the skill.
Yes.
And where are we now? America has diminishing skill. I think
Yeah.
the best minds of Apple have basically moved on, retired, gotten old, etc. It's not clear to me that the next graduates coming out of Caltech or MIT or whatever are going to have the same wherewithal. They often graduate without understanding much about something like a CNC machine because there's no factories really for them to be doing all of this in.
Yeah.
There are some major exceptions, I should say. SpaceX and Tesla are doing tremendous jobs, but even those companies, as amazing as they are, they're not doing stuff in the volumes that is routine for Apple or, frankly, hundreds of companies in China. And in China, they still have the skill, they still have the scale, but they also have the skill.
Yes.
So, Apple has been good at the know-how, but the execution is in China. But China has both the know-how and the execution. So I think you already see this. The world's best phones to me are not the iPhone. It's like the new Xiaomi, it's the trifold Huawei, and so forth.
The next Johnny Ive will be the Chinese, right? Apple kind of cultivate some Chinese giant tech company. For example, in your book, you said like Luxshare.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce it
Luxshare,
right?
yeah.
Luxshare, and also the BYD. So right now, people say that China is trying to replicate the same model with AI servers and chips. Does that worry you a lot, or you think that's the inevitable path that the world will change?
Well, inevitable or not, it worries me. So I would say before we even get to data centers and AI, because that's a little future looking, we can say we've already seen sort of the switch in smartphones themselves, right? Because Apple has 20% market share, and the other 80% are basically divided between Samsung having about 20% market share, and then everybody else is Chinese.
Yeah.
Right? HTC, other Taiwanese companies, all gone. Japanese companies, basically all gone.
Yeah.
BlackBerry, my native company, gone. So I already think you're seeing all sorts of shifts in the landscape towards China. And then the question is, to what extent will they do amazingly well with data centers and AI?
Yeah.
I know less about the data center rollout, but I am more convinced by China's strategy in AI than I am America's. America has these sort of fanciful hopes about artificial general intelligence. Now, if I'm wrong about that and you think that's right, then maybe that's a good strategy. But I don't think you're going to have this sort of universal high income idea that Elon Musk has and so forth, where we're all sort of like living our best lives and just being paid by the government. And that strikes me as fanciful and not even desirable, to be frank. I mean, most people get their identity through their work. Yeah. I mean, do what you love or something through work. A far better sort of conception than
just waiting for somebody feed me.
Well, what's that Pixar film?
Wall-E?
Wall-E,
Yeah.
Right? That dystopian vision where we're basically just, like, you have to have quite a weird and optimistic view of humans to think that if we all just had enough money, we would just be, like, living our best lives. Like, we really would just be doom scrolling all day. So Wall-E is probably a more, sophisticated version of humanity than anything Elon Musk has said. I like Elon Musk in certain respects, but he's also a strange character.
Copy and pass model, would it happen in AI generation?
So maybe I'll come back to that. I think I'm answering the question a little bit differently, which is that China's focus on AI is on embodied AI. So it's putting it inside production lines, robots, drones, etc.
It's edge AI.
It's diffusing AI. Edge AI is a good term too, to actually get productivity use cases out of it, right? A very pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
Whereas we're mostly focused on chatbots. Again, Tesla's a big exception to this, but like the Tesla approach, when people think, oh, Tesla's like the way to go or whatever, like that is the Chinese approach.
Yeah.
So Tesla's an outlier in America, but that's what so many companies are doing in China. There's like 100 humanoid companies in China. And it's probably true that 95 of them will fail, but in the intense competition that they have, the 5 that end up winning that Darwinian struggle are probably going to be world leaders.
You mentioned that the comparison scaled and scale.
Yeah.
And Taiwan and US, we do have scales.
Yeah.
But we don't have scale. But China, they now have both.
Yeah.
And we also talked about AI. So now everybody's talking about AI. So for companies that are developing AI, what are the lessons they can learn from the Apple experience and when they are like pushing AI, what can they do? What can they do differently? Balance the skill and scale problem.
So thankfully, it's actually such a different market that you're not seeing the same thing play out, which is to say when Amazon or Meta or Google talks about making massive data centers, they're not in Guizhou, right? They're in Louisiana and so forth. So in other words, I don't think I have to actually go to them and say, make sure you don't over-consolidate into China. That's not part of the game plan
They're
anyway.
even thinking about building that in the space.
Yeah, but exactly. But I don't think even that isn't based on geopolitics or like a geopolitical awakening.
Profit.
It's more just the basis of how the products function and the fact that you want the data servers in your own community and that kind of thing. Yeah, the space thing is wild. I mean,
but that makes sense. You like the constant energy and and cooling system.
Yeah.
There are probably so many reasons why it can't work in space that I'm oblivious to, but I just have a knee-jerk skepticism because we've never done anything like that in the past. But yeah, Elon recently was making the argument, like, there's no weather in space. It's always sunny. You don't even need to have batteries on these things because batteries, of course, are storing the energy so they can operate at night or something. There is no nighttime in space. You don't need that. And so therefore the costs are down or whatever. I mean, that was mind-blowing when he described it on the podcast
So
recently.
maybe the next arena is not AI, it's about space. for
Well,
United
it's
States,
AI
China.
in space, essentially, right?
All at the same time.
Which is wild. I mean, one thing that's, I think, quite funny that we should always remember is, I mean, there's literally a Tesla Roadster just rotating around the globe every day.
Yeah.
You know? Like, this is a wild imagination of Elon Musk that he's able to pull these things off. I mean, I'm not saying there's any utility to that, of course, but he's sort of proving that, like, you know,
Crazy things can happen.
he's got a rocket company. I mean, the dude can launch things into space.
And about the reliance on China, so that actually become a huge risk. And in your previous interview, you also mentioned that you said that no company in the world has more exposure in China annexing Taiwan than Apple.
Yeah.
So during your interviews or your research when doing this book, do you know that have any Apple senior leadership or high-level leadership, they have any contingency plan on reducing the potential risk in the cross-trade?
So it's hard to speak for, like, so I mean, the official view of the company is that they wouldn't even like answer this kind of question, right? So you can't really cite that. And then the conversations I've had, they're pretty multifaceted, right? People in Apple are really smart, but they don't agree with each other. So they have different views. So it's hard to sort of, you know, on behalf of them, give you like one answer, but I also don't want to give you 6. But one of the answers is that they don't see it as a problem the way that I see it as a problem, right? Really? Because they would say, look, we're pretty safe in China. So yes, we're consolidated. You know, if I give them, rattle off some statistics or something, that's not where they disagree. They disagree that they're vulnerable as a result of that, right?
Do you think they're naive?
Yes. But I also don't think the argument's without merit. So more or less quoting someone to the best of my memory who basically said, look, you know, Xi Jinping has some reasons to go after Apple, but there are so many other reasons not to go after Apple, right? I mean, you think of the fact that everybody knows Apple, reporters write about them all the time, we're all aware of where its business interests are, et cetera. If for whatever reason Beijing decided to cancel its export license from China, I mean, every company on the planet with exposure to China would have a meeting that day about how they're changing their plans, right? That's not in Beijing's interest at all. It's very much in the interest of Beijing that Apple continues to build their products in China and sort of show that this is a gleaming city on a hill in the manufacturing sense. And of course, the whole book is about the knowledge transfer of having Apple embedded in your country and what it means that they're training your workforce and stuff. So the whole host of reasons that Apple executives are correct in saying, like, the chances of them going after us are pretty slim. On the other hand, it's a weird kind of fingers crossed that nothing's going to hurt us kind of thing. A lot of experts would have said there wasn't any chance Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and they did. One of my best read friends, like just like a really smart guy, shout out to Jordan, he told me 20 years ago, just never underestimate nationalism. Yeah. And I think that's, I think about that line all the time. He doesn't know that, but I do.
You always say that China has scale. However, recent years, just maybe the same year that you start writing this book, China is stepping in the recession, that their economics maybe not go well as before. So do you think that China still has a scale? And do you think that Apple should move their production lines or their like distribution, product selling as fast as they can to cut the reliance on China?
So the trouble is, this is why I say in English that they're captured by China, because there's really not another place that they can go.
India, you mentioned.
Yeah. So India, you know, I don't know if you've been to India recently.
I did.
She did.
I just passed by the Foxconn factory.
Really?
Okay. So I remember going to China for a few weeks and then being in India the following month. And I never felt so underwhelmed about democracy. Because, of course, you know, I grew up in Canadian democracy. You think that's obviously the way to go or whatever. But if you had a time machine going back to 1980 or whatever, I don't think you would implement democracy in China. Like, would you would have got 12% growth instead of 10%? That seems unlikely. Like, the system that they've engineered in China has actually worked out incredibly well. And the democratic system in India hasn't produced the same results. I don't want to be anti-democratic. I'm just trying to deal with facts on the ground here. You know, if you were born in 1980 in India versus China, you've seen a hell of a lot more growth in China than you have in India.
That's true.
Yeah, maybe it's different if you're a Uyghur, something like that. Totally understand that. But, you know, sort of the basis of the Chinese model has just produced such better results. So it's tough for Apple to replicate the same playbook in India when the government just doesn't have the same incentive structure where you have the local cadres really working hand in glove, introducing a certain form of dynamism to sort of lure in capital and nurture it, right? I mean, I compare local cadres in the communist system to be like a venture capitalist, one who invests in your company, sits on the board and cuts the red tape and does what it can to drive growth. You don't have that really in America, and you don't really have that in India. And until you do, it's just never going to be attractive for Apple to make like big swinging moves to India. They're going to do a little, but most of the moves they're doing to India are about tariff reduction, not, oh, we've got a geopolitical problem, we need to diversify. That's not their motivation.
In China, there's plenty of Taishang. In your book, you write about Taishang, the Taiwanese businessmen who help Apple and other foreign companies to build the whole supply chain in China, because we share the same language, actually.
Yeah.
But then we said, who can help American or other foreign company to go into India to deploy the whole supply chain?
So, of course, the likes of Foxconn, Wistron, et cetera, have gone to India to try to replicate this playbook, and it hasn't been the same return on investment. Wistron has basically sold its factory to Tata and kind of given up on the effort. Foxconn hasn't given up on the effort, but it certainly hasn't sort of seen the same results. And so Tata in India is the group that is really trying to, I want to say sort of being the Foxconn of India, but it's also a lot more ambitious already. I mean, Tata has so many different businesses, creates EVs, consultancies, I mean, just all sorts of things. So it's already sort of like much more beyond Foxconn. So there's like a unit of Tata, shall we say, that wants to be the Foxconn of the country. And I think they're proving to be more successful, but still not really on the same basis as the original iPhone growth. In part because Apple's not putting in the same level of investment. Yeah, I want to be optimistic about that, but I speak to people on the ground frequently. And if I start the conversation optimistic, it doesn't end optimistically.
In your book, that to rely on China market is not a good thing for the future. Actually, you step into the trap. But there's still a group of people in Taiwan who believe relying on China and getting closer tied with China is the only way that they can survive, that we can survive.
Yeah.
So after spending all your years doing research on Apple in China story, one message you will give to those people?
So the timing of the book, I think, is really interesting. I wasn't sure when I was writing it, if I was writing it too early or too late. And now I think the timing sort of is pretty good. And I don't know what it'll look like in 2035. My base case, or rather not my base case, my hope for scenario is that by 2035, Apple has stunned the world with how quickly it can move in other places that my book actually just looks completely incorrect, right? That's my hope. I see nothing moving in that direction, but that would be my hope. So the answer to your question, I think, depends on the person's politics, right? If you're Taiwanese and you like the idea of being reabsorbed into Beijing and being part of one China, then I don't know, I guess that's probably fine. Then you probably should choose China. That makes sense. I'm not Taiwanese, but that's not my political leaning, right? I think Taiwan's a thriving, proud, democratic country. And the more that the Taichung are investing into essentially the capabilities that would allow them to take over the island, I think the more problematic that entire 4-decade history is going to be. And that's sort of the same case for Apple, right? So it's more visceral with Taiwan because of the history of sort of Taiwan's formation after World War II as a modern nation is the losers of the Chinese Civil War set up government here. So, Apple doesn't have the same sort of like closeness there. But I end a chapter by saying as China GDP eventually overtakes America's, more people are going to ask, like, how do they do it? I mean, we're talking about a country that when Mao dies is poorer than sub-Saharan Africa. And a few decades later, it's not just that they're doing well and they're wealthy, but they figured out the most complicated machinery, processes, logistics, high-end electronics, etc. How did they do it? And I think more people are going to be like, we taught them how to do it. So my answer is it's contingent on what's going to happen. If the superpowers sort of have a great deal between Trump and Xi and, we no longer see them as great adversaries or whatever, in a certain sense, then my book's sort of irrelevant in some sense. But I don't know who has that view. It just strikes me that there's more and more tension. Yeah. And so in that scenario, In the same way that, companies like IBM were not installing major facilities in the Soviet Union and helping Moscow, that's the situation we are in now. So it's pretty bizarre. And the alternative, or like what to do, is really quite difficult because, people talk about Cold War I and Cold War II. Yeah. And I use these terms as well, but I don't like the analogy because the biggest difference between these two Cold Wars is like there was almost no economic interaction between the Soviet Union and America. Yeah. Apple literally ships more products out of China to America each year than trade between the USSR and the Soviet Union over 4 decades. Yeah. So it's the singular biggest difference between them. And so we can't just decouple sort of really easily or something like that, right? Like it's a multi-year effort. And for the case of Apple that has a $70 billion business there, they wouldn't even want to, even if they could. And so that really puts them sort of out of options because they don't want to piss off Beijing, they don't want to piss off Chinese consumers, but they also don't want to piss off Trump. So it just puts them in a position where I don't actually think there's like a winning formula for them to do much.
Right now, a lot of people are saying that for high-end technology stuff, we need to have the clean network, and we should reduce our reliance on China. And before low-end products, we can still rely on China. But according to what you mentioned, it seems like I would consider iPhone, Mac, they're still pretty high-end.
Yeah.
So according to what you mentioned, we still need to rely on China, right?
So I have some different opinions on this, and some of this stuff is in flux and subject to argument and data, and I'm happy to change my opinions. But for instance, America has big tariffs on solar panels from China.
Yeah.
I think you should abolish them. I think solar panels have come down in price something like 90% over a couple decades. If you want to have a green revolution in America, you need loads of solar panels. Solar panels, as far as I understand, again, subject to being disputed, solar panels are kind of dumb. Right? They're not smart technology like a BYD EV.
They don't listen to you or something.
Yeah, exactly, right? They're not geared up with Alexa or something. So I think we should be importing sort of, taking advantage in a sense of the efficiency of technology and engineering in China and importing as many as we can. They're sort of like on sale all the time, and then using them for our own means. That strikes me as a really good deal. So is that reliance on China, or is that actually just taking advantage of what the country's capable of?
Both.
I guess that's both. That might be a political question, but I'm okay with that. It's more problematic when we're talking about rare earths, which have a dual use, right? They're used in iPhones, they're used in submarines and F-35s. In a certain sense, it's stunning that China not only has something like 90% of the refining of these metals, but that in a certain sense that they sell them to America at all. It is so easy for them to stop doing that if they feel like it. Yeah. And that point of leverage is why Trump capitulated last year after threatening tariffs. Yeah. I think it's probably why he went after Greenland as well, right?
Trump, and Ukraine actually.
Well, the Ukraine thing, I guess, just goes back further. Right? I mean, it's a war. But what I mean is, the more I was talking to the two scholars about this yesterday, but then at dinner, I said, the more I study Chinese politics, the better I understand Trump. Oh. And then one of them said, Dr. Chu said, the more I study Trump, the more I understand Chinese politics. Right? He really is a Chinese leader. I mean, you think about how Tim Cook, Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, et cetera, all came to his inauguration. Yeah. That's very much a sort of Chinese move where he wants.
Kowtow or?
Well, yeah, of course. And they're all sort of having to suck up to him and everything. Loyalty, that's not traditionally not what you talk about. Even, when Trump announced Liberation Day, I mean, Dan Wong has pointed out that's kind of a Chinese thing. There's just a lot about how Trump wants to set things up that strike me as he's a fish in water if you put him in China.
But I have a question that you mentioned about that solar panel. Is it, it didn't hurt anyone, right? But however, how about Russia oil? The cheap. So if India buy Russia oil, that is cheap and it won't hurt anybody, but then that will make your adversary more stronger.
So it's a good point. But I think the Russian economy is so dependent on selling natural resources to the world that's why it's more big deal because the West is trying to sanction Russia, and so if India sort of as an outlier is securing all these resources from Russia, it's sort of undermining that whole effort. I don't think solar panels are a major part of the Chinese economy.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay. So final question.
Yeah, I actually wanted to final question is back to Taiwan. You mentioned about Mindy also mentioned about the Taiwanese businessmen. They play a huge role in the success of Apple in China. In your observation, what kind of characteristics of Taiwanese businessmen make that happen?
I mean, I think you could probably just give some cliche ones, like really hardworking and knowledgeable and stuff. But the one that I really focus on is there's a humbleness to learn from anyone. And you don't get that in a lot of other cultures. I don't think America gets that, for instance. Like, America has a terrible healthcare system, right? It can't be that difficult to get some people that have experience at McKinsey or whatever, right? Send them around the world, right? Study Singapore, study Switzerland. What are the best healthcare systems? How do we implement them in America? But Americans don't think like that, right? They'll be like, those are communist systems or something like that.
You don't learn from others.
They don't want to learn from others. And the funny thing is, America ends up learning from others because they have such ordinarily, not this year, welcomeness to immigrants, that you get a sort of different thinking, beyond sort of, red state America for coming up with solutions. But generally speaking, they don't want to be learning from other countries, which I think is obviously a real problem. And I think the Taiwanese were just willing to learn from anybody. And I think they also sort of taught that, right, to the Chinese. I mean, one thing that I, in a sense, didn't fully grasp or hadn't articulated well in the book, but was told to me after speaking with more Apple people, once the book was published, was that when the Apple engineers would go over to China, they weren't just teaching engineering, there was a cultural transfer as well. Because Steve Jobs really cared about things that the customer will never see, right? Cared about the insides of the iPhone, right? What it looked like, the colors on the inside. Certainly cared about the back of the computer, right? He once showed a computer and said, the back of our computer looks nicer than the front of our competitors' computers, right? And most people don't think like that. They don't care about that. But Apple forced all of their suppliers to think like that. And that's not an engineering lesson. That's a cultural lesson.
Why couldn't they replicate that in India? Give them a cultural lesson and training.
So this is, we were at this event last night, right? And the one Indian guy sort of raised his hand. I've since had contact with him, but that was really funny, right? I think we all erupted in laughter because I had sort of said this isn't going to be happening in India, and he's like, I'm Indian. So when I talk to people on the Apple production lines in places like Foxconn and Tata in India, they'll say the senior engineers that are Indian, they don't want to be taught. They think, look, I went to a top Indian university. I know what I'm doing. And Apple's like, yeah, but we're not following best practices. We're doing something in such a novel way that we're essentially establishing best practices, and other people will follow us. And so in a certain sense, like, there's this great anecdote in the book for these senior people, maybe not senior people, but key people are on a yacht with Terry Guo. It's actually Terry Guo's yacht. Terry's not there, but two senior Foxconn officials are. And what the Apple people like so much about the Taiwanese officials is their hunger. It's not their expertise. They don't have the expertise. If you wanted to work with Siemens, they had better experience, or Siemens Ericsson. They had more experience building phones at the time. Foxconn had, some contracts with Nokia, but in 2007, they were not the leader of phones, and therefore the natural point for Apple to choose for the iPhone. It was that there was a willingness to do whatever it takes and to listen to whoever is needed to listen to get things done.
So they're desperate, determined, and humble.
Well, I don't like the word desperate. So it's funny. So there's another anecdote in the book where Foxconn goes way out of its way to essentially reverse engineer an iPod, right, and build their own model,
and show that they
and
can
then
do this
invite
job.
Apple engineers over and say, "Look what we did." The way this was put to me is they basically orchestrated their own job interview, and then not only do they show the product, and the Apple engineers are like, "This looks like we built it, we designed it and built it." They'd even done the software, right? So they wow them, and then they show them a facility basically of this is where we would build it, right? Please choose us, kind of thing. And so, I mean, Terry Guo had this understanding of what Apple needed before Apple knew what it was, which is pretty astonishing, and that's pretty hard to replicate. So I want to give the Taiwanese all the credit in the world for being able to get that done, because there's something really intangible about what that skill set is, and so that's sort of hard to replicate. And so whatever you want to call that, tacit knowledge or what have you, Apple's just not having that same experience in India. That's not a knock against India. I don't think you'd get that in Canada or America either. But there was something special about how the Taiwanese were operating on the mainland.
thank you for your time, and we appreciate that you share a lot of insightful concepts when we talk about the United States, China's competition, and also Apple in China. And also, I think that you gave a lot of message to Taiwanese people. Yeah. So thank you again, and wish you have a good day in the rest of your stay in Taiwan.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We got a small gift to you.
Oh, right. Okay.
A really
Thank
small
you.
one. So.
So I've already received so much. It's about to be Lunar New Year, as you know.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So I've received so much pineapple
let's
cake
get another one.
No, I only had this one.
that I already have to get a new bag just to take all the gifts home.
Okay, so this is also
really
for the
nice welcoming people in
Lunar
Taiwan.
New Year, but it's different actually.
No, it is different.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I can tell it's not pineapple cake.
Yeah, it's not. And it's not that big. You can pack it. You can
Yeah,
just fold
yeah.
it into your...
Oh, I almost buy the pineapple cake today. No, actually, thank God I didn't buy it. So this is, we call it 春联. Do you know?
I don't know.
Really? You live in Hong Kong for 3
So you
years?
have to hang it. You have to hang
So I know it's the year of
outside
the
it.
horse, and here's the horse. Oh, I
Yeah.
hang them up. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then this will brings you luck.
Okay. So my neighbors to the right and left of me in San Francisco are Chinese, and most of our neighborhood is Chinese.
Yeah, they were
I'll
wow.
fit
But
right in.
this one is more important because this will bring you fortune.
Okay.
So luck and fortune you can choose.
I will send you a photo. That'll be in my window. Wow. By September 2023, I went on book leave for 12 months. And in the 12 months, I wrote the entire book.
You can finish all the 220 interviews within a year.
Yeah.
And using Notes app.
I just had 0 interruptions every time because I would go to WeWork downtown. I'd be the
Yeah.
only person there from 8 p.m. to 7 in the morning.
I don't know they opened it.
They're not open. No, they just don't kick you out. My favorite character in the book, and the one that was sort of the most rewarding to learn about and then begin writing about, was John Ford.